On October 29, 1935, in the city of Uji-Yamada, now Ise, a young boy was born. The boy was the youngest child of 7. His father was a local junior high principal who would later become the education chief of the Okayama prefecture, where he would move his family. Unfortunately, that would cause the young boy's family to be caught up in the air raids that befell Okayama in the waning days of World War II, and while all his family did survive, it did have a profound impact on the young boy. Soon, that young boy grew into a young man. After graduating high school, the young man attended the prestigious Tokyo University where he studied French literature. It was presumed that he would go into the field of academia just like his father, but something changed all that. During his studies, the young man caught a showing of Paul Grimalt's French animated film, The King and the Mockingbird. It was an incomplete version of the film, released without the approval of Grimald or original author Jacques Prévert, and the actual director's cut would not be released until 1980. But incomplete or not, the film captured the heart of the young man and made him realize the absolute storytelling potential of the medium of animation. Once the young man graduated in 1959, he went on a job hunt. At the suggestion of a friend, he decided to take up a job offer listed in the newspaper from Toei Animation. And while the young man had very little in the way of an artistic background, he figured that this could be the opportunity he needed to tell stories through animation. Surprisingly, the young man ended up passing Toei's entrance exam, and his career in animation began in earnest. He would receive his first credit as assistant to director Taiji Yabushida for the 1961 film Anju Tsuzushi Omaru. To animation historians, he would be known as the director who didn't draw, because of how little he did so compared to his contemporaries. To his friends, he would be known as Paku-san, for how often he would show up late to morning meetings hurriedly shoving bread into his mouth for breakfast. But to everyone else, he would be known under the name he was first credited under, Isao Takahata. And less than 10 years after he joined Toei Animation as an assistant director, he would make his directorial debut with a film that would change the landscape of Japanese animation forever.
KYOTO ビデオ
その時は太陽の王子、そうお前さんが呼ばれる時だ。
In a faraway kingdom of the north, a young boy named Horus fights off a pack of silver wolves, and in doing so wakes up an ancient stone giant. The giant, named Moog, is having a problem with a splinter in his shoulder. Horus succeeds in pulling the splinter out, which actually turns out to be a massive, rusted, ancient sword. Moog proclaims this to be the Sword of the Sun, and states that if Horus can reforge the sword, he will come to Horus' side and declare him the Prince of the Sun. At the same time though, he tells Horus that there is no way he could ever reforge the sword by himself.
無理だよ、お前さん一人の力では。
As Horus runs home, he gets word from his talking bear friend Koro that his father is on his deathbed. Horus' father uses his final words to tell Horus about their past. That their family was originally from a northern seaside village, and that they were devastated by the ice wizard Grunwald's attack, leaving Horus and his father as the only survivors. Horus' father finally tells him that he must return to the land of his birth and avenge his lost village before finally breathing his last.
Horus, お前の仲間のところへ。仲間?
With that, Horus sets off to the north with Koro and his newfound sword at his side. Along his journey, he will settle in a village just like his father described, and will encounter many things like more packs of silver wolves, a giant pike, Grunwald himself trying to get Horus on his side, and, most importantly, a mysterious girl with a beautiful singing voice named Hilda, whose overall allegiances and motivations are not always clear.
僕が一人ぼっちだった時みたいに。あなたも？じゃあ、私 たち兄弟で双子よ。きっとそうよ。双子だったのよ。
Today's subject is a big one. Normally I stick around the 80s, 90s, and 2000s for material with occasional dips into the wild 70s. But for today, we're going back, way back, to the 1960s, when anime as we know it was just beginning to take form. This decade is Japanese animation's formative years, where the techniques and forms that we most associate with the art form are being established and perfected. At the same time, most people find it difficult to go back to this period just because of how primitive it is compared to what came after. But if you had to watch an anime from the 60s, it has to be Horus, Prince of the Sun, because out of all the anime released in this decade, this one remains the most influential. If there was ever one film released that defined future animation to come, it is Horus. In a 2001 Anime Age article listing the most influential anime in history, Horus was put right at number 3, right behind Panda and the Magic Serpent, the first color animated film ever released by a Japanese company, and goddamned Astro Boy. And yet, I bet a good 80% of you watching this video have not heard of Horus, and probably for good reason. Despite critical adulation from contemporary reviews, Horus was actually a massive box office loser, but its legacy persisted throughout multiple avenues, to the point that if it did not exist, anime as we know it would not exist. We would not have the films of Ghibli without Horus. We would not have anime involving emotionally complex heroes' journeys without Horus. We probably would not even have the same fan culture without Horus. Simply put, Horus is the Beatles of anime. The story of Horus, Prince of the Sun, is the story of how anime became anime, and we're gonna tell it right now, from its production, to its influence, to why it still holds up as the finest examples of anime film.
人間の住むところへだ。僕らの仲間が住むところへだ。
Allow me to set the scene for you. It's the post-war era for Japan, and the nation is rebuilding after a long, destructive, and senseless war. And in this emerges Japan's first large-scale animation studio devoted entirely to the art of animation, Toei Doga, or Toei Animation as they're known internationally. We'll get into a more detailed history of their founding some other time, but what you need to know is that the architect behind Toei Animation was its head producer, Hiroshi Okawa. In the 50s, he had noticed the success of the animated movies Walt Disney and his company were exporting to Japan, and asked, why should the Americans reap all the benefits for making animated movies aimed at families? Okawa had two goals for Toei Animation. First, for Toei Animation to position itself as the Disney of the East. Not only would Okawa fashion himself into an Uncle Walt figure in his own right, but he also believed that Toei Animation's features should be lavish, high-budget affairs. He wanted Disney quality, and he was willing to spend Disney money. And second, he wanted his animators to produce at least 2 animated features a year. Since Disney had gotten a 30-year head start against Japan, Okawa knew Toei would need to catch up in the volume of film by any means necessary. In fact, Okawa and the higher-ups actually timed the production and release of the aforementioned Panda and the Magic Serpent to when Disney's supply of exportable films would dry up. In the early days of the studio's life, Okawa spoke to his animators outside the studio gates and laid out the above plans. And while a lot of the animators predictably balked at these ambitions, over the course of several years, they would meet these goals, releasing several grandly animated films over the course of 5 years. And then, in 1963, something happened. You probably could guess. Manga author Osamu Tezuka saw instant success with the founding of his own animation studio, Mushipro, and their breakout hit TV adaptation of his own Astro Boy manga. And even though it was far more lower budget than Toei's productions by virtue of being on TV than in theaters, it was enough to make Okawa nervous. Funnily enough, Okawa was indirectly responsible for Tezuka getting into the animation business. Thanks to a bad experience being a consultant for their film Alakazam the Great, Tezuka was inspired to create Mushipro because he could not let a guy like Okawa have a monopoly over an entire industry. While Okawa was still interested in making big-budget anime films for children and families, he began drawing up plans for a company restructuring to start focusing more time and energy on cheaper television productions. One of these productions was a Jungle Book ripoff called Wolf Boy Ken, and it was on this production that Isao Takahata became way more involved in the director's process. Under the tutelage of his mentor, animator Yasuo Ostuka, Takahata headed up direction for one of Toei's first forays into television. While this was going on, Takahata was also heading up Toei Animation's labor union with Ostuka as his second-in-command. After one labor meeting, Takahata was waiting for the bus in the middle of the pouring rain and struck up a conversation with a person sitting next to him. That person being a greenhorn animator who only just joined the union, who went by the name Hayao Miyazaki. Cut to 1965. Takahata had just turned 30 and figured that it was high time he could make a project that he could call his own. He pitched an idea for a movie based off of a puppet play called The Sun Above Chikisani, created by screenwriter Kazuo Fukuzawa, which in turn was based off of an epic tale from the Yukar, the oral tradition of the indigenous Ainu people that resided in Hokkaido, Japan. Pre-production began that autumn before actual production began on April 1966, with Takahata in the director's seat. This was actually a huge deal because Takahata was in his early 30s. The role of director at Toei was usually given to more senior members. Even more astonishing was that Takahata somehow convinced the Toei higher-ups to give him a 100 million yen budget for the film. Normally, the average Toei movie averaged around 75 million, which was still high budget, but not to this level normally. With this newfound power, Takahata assembled a crew of animators he knew would be the best of the best. Animation director would be Takahata's mentor Yasuo Ostuka. Concept artist and key animator would be Takahata's own mentee, Hayao Miyazaki. Character designer would be Yoichi Kotabe, who would later become the designer for the Mario Bros. Games. And various talented key animators who included, but were not limited to, Yasuji Mori, who has been credited with being the originator of the animation director position, and Reiko Okayama, one of the first prominent female animators in the anime industry. At first, production on Horus went smoothly until October 1966, when Toei immediately halted production and had most of the production staff reshuffled to work on the funny animal TV show Hustle Punch. They told Takahata in no uncertain terms that production will only be restarted if he made the following changes. The first was that the runtime had to be cut from the originally slated 2 hours to the more standard 90 minutes. This was done because Toei assumed that younger audiences would not be patient for a movie longer than an hour and a half. The second was that they had to make the picture feel more like the other Toei movies that came before. The Disney of the East moniker was not just a name. It was a philosophy that Okawa followed religiously. It was mandated that all Toei movies needed to have songs and comic relief sidekicks in the Disney mold. This meant that Horus had to include musical numbers that weren't there before, and the addition of studio-mandated cute characters like the child Philip, the bear cub Koro, the squirrel Chiro, and the owl Toto. And finally, and most damningly, any and all explicit references to the Ainu people and culture had to be removed. In the post-war Japan, the Ainu people's existence flew in the face of the government's attempt to cultivate the image of a homogenic monoculture following the collapse of the multi-ethnic empire. To Toei, acknowledging Ainu culture would only stir up unnecessary controversy, so they told Takahata to make the setting more European/Scandinavian in nature. Reluctantly, Takahata acquiesced to all the studio's demands and began making the changes. Production resumed in January of 1967. But it was a lot less smooth this time around. Horus ended up missing every single deadline that was set up in the production schedule. The budget ballooned from 100 million yen to a whopping 130 million yen. This caused Takahata to receive low marks across the board in each of his performance reviews during production. Production would not finish until March of 1968, almost 2 years production time. For comparison, the average Toei production around that time took 8 months at most. And even then, as we'll soon see, the film was never completed as planned thanks to a lack of time and budget near the end. But all that didn't matter right now. What mattered was that the film was now in the can and could now change the world. The reason why Isao Takahata has been known as the director who doesn't draw is because he came up in an antiquated system where the director of an anime didn't have to know how to draw, only to have a creative eye to spearhead the direction of a project. According to Yasuo Ostuka in his book about the Horus production, appropriately titled Cels Covered in Sweat, Takahata wielded absolute authority during the storyboarding process, and Ostuka was his pen. Ostuka had to follow Takahata's vision for the boarding process to the letter. According to him, this is what made the production so grueling for him. When you see the final product though, you understand Takahata's revolutionary vision. Horus was an incredibly innovative film. Whereas other anime films of the time were content to follow the principles established by the West, Takahata sought out his own methods. His influences were not just the animation of Disney, but also the French New Wave, Italian neorealism, and documentaries. This allowed him to produce an innovative style of boarding that treated the animation camera like an actual three-dimensional movie camera. Low-angle shots, high-angle shots, soft focuses, vast sweeping master shots, even shots that give the illusion of a camera's tracking shots. There's also Takahata's blocking, which uses the depth of field to great effect, like Horus being introduced to Grunwald as he holds the rope that keeps Horus from falling to certain doom as a means to try to convince him to come over to his side. Or this scene where Hilda pushes Horus off a cliff into the Forest of Doubt. The action is done in an extreme wide shot to the point where Horus is just a dot falling, but it both establishes the vast space where Horus is falling into, as well as symbolize the grave sin of Hilda's actions. But the boarding was the only thing Takahata insisted having complete control over. As for the rest of the production, it was far more democratic. Takahata encouraged a far more egalitarian production cycle where anyone was free to innovate and utilize their own ideas for how the story of Horus should be told. This could be partially the reason why production took so long because, like Takahata, his animators were also incredibly ambitious and couldn't help but make ambitious shots. The film's cold open involves a lengthy segment where our title hero is fighting off a pack of wolves. It's a very complicated sequence with long takes between cuts, multiple characters on screen, Horus having to move near and far from the camera, and involves the physics of Horus's primary weapon, an axe on the end of a rope. This whole scene was done with the combined power of Yasuo Ostuka, Hayao Miyazaki, Reiko Okayama, and Yoichi Kotabe. You can tell the talents of those four must have been working overtime to complete this tone setter. And then there's the scenes mostly done by one of those single people who really get to show off their nascent talents. Scenes such as the climactic battle against Grunwald, where he summons a massive ice mammoth, which was done by Hayao Miyazaki. There's also Horus's battle with the giant pike, which was done by Yasuo Otsuka, a scene so fierce in its execution of a lone boy against a formidable fish that it almost seems straight out of the Monster Hunter series. This film is full of scenes where you know the animators were pushing their ideas and energies to the almost breaking points. There's experiments in Technicolor, lighting, the layering of multiple cells, the way size is conveyed through large characters being animated with fewer frames, and the smaller characters being animated with more. And the crowd scenes. My god! The crowd scenes are some of the best you'll ever see. Characters dancing, celebrating, fighting, or catching fish in a massive group, with all the recognizable main character designs blended in for good measure. And everybody moves very naturally within these scenes, especially in the scenes of the folk dancing, where Miyazaki actually filmed Super 8 footage of the staff doing these traditional dances in the Toei parking lot for reference. But even outside of the big ambitious moments, there's also the beautifully done subtle bits of character animation. Specifically of the character Hilda, whom both Reiko Okayama and Yasuji Mori put so much heart into that she almost feels like a real actress on the screen.
森でまた銀色狼を見たんだ。太陽の剣を鍛えて今度こそやっつけてやる。
Speaking of Hilda, her design is actually a big part of another idea Horus's team got past the big bosses at Toei. While they were not allowed to use explicit references to Ainu culture, they could get away with implicit references. Despite supposedly taking place in Scandinavia or Eastern Europe from the art, music, and culture that surrounds them, most of the architecture and clothing is based off of the Ainu culture, particularly Hilda, who, with her status coming from another village, is able to get away with looking the most Ainu out of all the cast. Even though the production of Horus was incredibly arduous through self-imposed workloads and studio meddling, Takahata's team was able to conquer many of the obstacles they faced. Even when they ran out of time and money and couldn't animate some of the set pieces, their choice of keyframes and cinematography still makes those scenes feel intense. Horus does not just go big on the visuals, its auditory realm is also a sound to be here. For voice acting, since this was done before the whole seiyuu industry had been perfected, is provided by actual stars of the stage and screen. Grunwald is voiced by Mikijiro Hira, a star described as Japan's best Shakespearean actor.
貴様の命は今俺の手にある。この世界がすべて俺の手の中にあるようにだ。さあ、貴様に俺が拒めるか。
Voicing Moog the Rock Giant is Tadashi Yokouchi, an actor of television and radio who was well known for his unusually deep voice.
よくやった。見事な剣だぞ。
And the voice of Hilda is Etsuko Ichihara, an actress who had a career that spanned 6 decades, one of her final roles being the grandmother in the 2016 hit anime film Your Name.
私の村にも一人いたわ。そして悪魔が攻めてきた時、その人はいなかった。なぜかしら。
Music was handled by Michio Mamiya, an accomplished and acclaimed classical and opera composer. He not only was responsible for giving Horus its sweeping, bombastic score, but also the songs Toei forced Takahata to use. Since they had to put them in, Takahata requested Mamiya to draw on folk music for inspiration. Not just Nordic folk music, but also Ainu folk music. Still being sneaky, I see. The music also plays a role in the story and informs us of characterization, another signifier that Hilda is not from around these parts. Instead of the folk style of the village, she sings in a Renaissance style, a genre of music Takahata was a huge fan of around that time. That's another part of something revolutionary Horus does. Beyond pushing the boundaries of animation, the team also pushed the boundaries in character writing. Before Horus, most of the characterization in anime films was pretty simplistic. Lots of black and white morality with a pure-hearted hero facing off against a dastardly villain. And if the hero did have flaws that needed to be overcome, that was only because those flaws existed in the original narrative the film was adapting. Horus brought a change by introducing way more complex characterization to the realm of anime film. One such instance is that Horus beating the giant pike and filling the village's streams back by himself is enough for him to earn the village's trust and accept him as one of their own. But the child Philip, while he's also grateful to Horus, is also angry at him. The pike had only recently killed Philip's father, and to Philip, Horus killing the pike only robbed him of a means to avenge him. But the most memorable instance of complex characterization comes from Hilda. Hilda's character is probably the most influential element of Horus that's not based around its innovations in animation. When we first encounter her, Hilda is an orphan of a village destroyed by Grunwald's minions, and Horus brings her back to the village for safety, where the villagers are immediately smitten by her beautiful singing voice. However, this ends up causing conflict as the villagers soon begin to slack off from work in order to hear Hilda's beautiful singing.
やめたよ俺はもう。ヒルダが歌い出すとみんなすぐ行っちまうじゃないか。あんたと二人っきりで何ができるんだ。
ヒルダ、ヒルダ。村中が持ちきりだ。誰も働きやしない。
This is by design, as it turns out that Hilda is one of Grunwald's minions, sent to sow strife and division amongst the townspeople. But that plan ends up hitting a snag when, despite Hilda's best efforts, the villagers still treat her with the utmost kindness, and this leaves her very conflicted internally.
ダメ。ごめんなさい、マウニ。ヒルダには本当の歌を歌えないの。
She feels loyalty to Grunwald, but the kindness that the villagers show her fills her with guilt about her actions. This conflict is symbolized by the presence of her two animal friends, Chiro and Toto being her shoulder angel and devil. Chiro is urging her to turn to the light side, while Toto is whispering in Hilda's ear that she must continue her mission since she owes Grunwald for both sparing her from the destruction of her own village and gifting her an amulet that allows her to stay alive.
グルンワルド様が下された命の玉が守ってくださる。
そんなに死ぬのが怖いのかい？マウニやホルスを殺してまでいつまでも生きていたいのかい？
Hilda then switches up her plans to getting rid of Horus since she can feel his presence being a big problem for both her and Master Grunwald. She releases a horde of rats during a wedding to imply Horus might be the source of a curse before trying to get him implicated on an attempt on the mayor's life. Once Horus decides to go off on his own again to face Grunwald as a means to prove his innocence, Hilda confronts him and reveals the truth as a way to mock him.
何も知らなかったのね、やっぱりあなたも。あなたが助けてくれたヒルダは本当はあなたの敵よ。なんだって？
As she prepares to kill him to show who she really is, Horus tries to appeal to her, saying that there is goodness inside of her. And while these words do cause Hilda to hesitate and struggle, she ultimately relents and shoves Horus into the forest of doubt. This action prompts Chiro to finally go her separate ways from Hilda, symbolizing that maybe Hilda is beyond redemption.
どこ行くの？人間の村さ。グルンワイルド様に殺されても、ヒルダに殺されても、僕は人間の村の方がいいんだ。
But even then, that gets more layered as we learn that Grunwald has been manipulating Hilda through various means.
見たか。お前はこうして死ぬ。死ぬのだ。
But then we get to the climax. After leaving the forest and having another encounter with her, Horus believes that Hilda can be redeemed because he senses her remorse.
そのヒルダを追い出すんだよ。負けるんじゃない。本当のヒルダがどんなに強いかを思い知らせてやるんだ。
While Horus is heading back to the village to fight the final battle, Philippe and Koro have gone looking for him and consequently have gotten themselves lost in Grunwald's relentless blizzard. This is when Hilda shows up and decides to give her amulet to save them at the cost of her own life. And to show how she's fully given herself to the side of good, she destroys Toto in one blow. Take that, Archimedes! And by the end, it turns out that Hilda didn't need the amulet to stay alive, and that was just another part of Grunwald's manipulation against her. She's able to be redeemed and live happily ever after with the villagers. There's a case you can make for Hilda being the true main character of Horus, since her character journey was one of growth. Meanwhile, Horus's journey just feels like a straightforward save the day plot, so he doesn't have that much of a character journey to really go on. Does he? One thing you must know about Isao Takahata is that he was a committed Marxist. It is said that when the Vietnam War broke out, he and his animators were rooting for the Viet Cong. And funnily enough, it was the then current fervor of Marxism amongst student groups that drove a lot of the themes seen in Horus. I'm not trying to be controversial when I say that Horus, Prince of the Sun is a Marxist film. It's got a lot of the socialist themes that Takahata really dug. Salt of the earth people in tightly knit communities, giving each other a helping hand, lots of footage of them working hard as well as playing hard, rustic realism to give the audience a documentary slice of life in the village. But most importantly, it all ties into Horus's central theme, the importance of unity. It's established early on that Grunwald is a master of divide and conquer. Through unknown means, he finds ways to sow division in people's villages so that when he attacks and conquers said village, the people are unable to form a united front against his attack. Horus's father urges his son to remember this as he dies. While he does believe that Horus should avenge his lost homeland, his father, above all else, wants Horus to find another village and be with other people, because mankind was not meant to live alone.
力を合わせさえしたら何も恐れるものはないのだと。ないのだと。
When Horus is taken in by the village after being rescued from the river, he does note their kindness in taking in a complete stranger like him in and giving him food and shelter. At the same time, he notices that they too are not immune to division. The giant pike that Grunwald has sent to the stream has disrupted their food supply chain, and they've suffered casualties trying to fend it off. And while Horus does sneak off to deal with the problem himself as thanks, the villagers are showing cracks in their community by their unwillingness to fight the thing that threatens their very survival.
村瀬に続く者はおらんのか。そうか。こんなものは役に立たんというのか。
When Horus and the villagers form a united front, they feel unstoppable, like when they are fending off the pack of wolves from their village. But when conflict arises, you can feel a weakness is forming that Grunwald is willing to exploit, such as Hilda's initial presence in the village.
あなただけがそんな狼を見たりお化けカマスをたった一人で退治したと言ってみたり、村中の人全部がこんな怖い思いをしているのに、あなただけは何にも知らなかったり。一体なぜ？
And why does Grunwald want to divide and conquer these villages so much? Easy, because he wants absolute power over these beings he sees as lesser than him. That's a recurring theme in this anime. Those who seek to divide people just want to do so in the pursuit of power. That's the reason why the character of the mayor's deputy Drago exists. He spends most of his time either trying to get the village to distrust Horus or use Hilda to his own means because he sees them as either a threat or a tool to use in his pursuit to usurp the mayor's position.
村長は頭が古いし、ポトムは若すぎる。
ホルスがいるわ。
あいつは危険だ。だからやはりこの私が統率せねばならんっていうことになる。
But where the theme comes through in the end is Horus's epiphany about the Sword of the Sun. Remember, Moog said that it was impossible for a kid like him to reforge the blade by himself. Throughout the film, Horus does try to reforge the blade with the help of the local blacksmith, but to no avail, and it seems that Moog was right. But after his time in the Forest of Doubt, Horus emerges with an epiphany. The sword can only be reforged with the united effort of the people. With this knowledge, he returns to the village for the final battle and, with the help of the entire village, reforges the Sword of the Sun. Using this sword, he is able to rally the villagers to fight back against Grunwald, and also have Moog return as he promised and make short work of the Ice Mammoth. And when the village is united against Grunwald, the battle is incredibly one-sided. Grunwald is forced to retreat back to his lair, but it's too late. Our heroes have him surrounded on all sides and have him dead to rights, symbolized by the once tall and imposing wizard looking small and helpless against the triumphant populace he once terrorized. Workers of the world, unite. It's a powerful delivery of how the theme of the oppressed masses can unite to revolt against an oppressor. It should be. The reason why Horus was made in the first place was to celebrate the victories won by Takahata and the Toei Union. While Toei was one of the first major anime studios to rise up in post-war Japan, it was not the best place for animators to work at. The starting salary was between 5,000 to 5,500 yen a month, a salary that couldn't even cover rent in most places. There was also a policy called Killer Weeks, where single male employees, read employees that didn't have a family to go home to or were not female, had to work through the nights on unpaid overtime, and it was very unkind to the health of the animation staff. After one of the directors of Alakazam the Great collapsed during production, it was the final straw for the animation team. A union was formed and demands were made. They wanted better hours, better pay, and supper during overtime. After a strike and a subsequent labor lockout, Toei relented and accepted most of the union's demands. For example, when Miyazaki started as an animator in 1963, his salary was 18,000 yen monthly. These union victories, combined with leftist student movements, really energized the creative staff of Horus. Miyazaki even said that Horus was enabled by the solidarity among the main staff that had built up during their union activism. However, the union activities were not on pause during the production of Horus. On the contrary, they were going into overdrive and partially contributed to Horus's development hell. Around the time of Horus, animators were demanding end-of-year bonuses that were the equivalent to a 3-month salary. This was standard for all other industries except Toei for some reason. Management was also incredibly poor around this time, with some staffers being overworked on multiple projects, while other staffers being forced to wait days before getting their assigned work. It was said that the union asked for the simple demand of the supervisors had to treat their staff humanely. And then there was Reiko Okoyama, who was being very open about the disparity in salary between her and her male colleagues, despite being given the same amount of work. She spent a lot of time going to the press about this issue. With all these issues, on top of the union's ringleader spending so much money and missing deadlines on a film that was deemed not Disney enough internally, you can guess how Hiroshi Okawa felt about all this. It's no coincidence that, around this time, Okawa was drawing up plans to move all of his salaried workers to contract positions and converting the workforce into an underpaid skeleton crew full of temps. He wanted to do that instead of negotiating with the animators and their union, which of course is a model no other anime studio has adopted since then, which has kept the wages of animators incredibly low and working conditions incredibly poor. Am I right, folks? But what did it matter? The Toei Animators Union was a united front against Okawa. They knew they had a great project on their hands. A true labor of love that would show Okawa and his band of stuffed shirts the kind of quality animation you could get with a democratic production system and a fully nourished talent pool. They failed. When Horus hit the theaters on July 21st, 1968, it was given almost zero marketing from Toei, and was only given 10 days in the theater. Even if all showings from those 10 days were jam-packed with people, making back the 130 million yen budget and then some was rendered impossible. According to Yasuo Ostuka, the film was the lowest recorded for a feature-length anime ever. It's clear Toei Animation sent Horus out to die. Washing their hands of the whole production, Okawa and the rest of the Toei higher-ups pinned the entire blame on Isao Takahata. Pakusan was reprimanded and demoted for how he helmed what Toei saw as a big, expensive failure. He would never direct a project for Toei Doga ever again. Takahata, Miyazaki, and most of the Horus staff would stay on board Toei right up until 1971. Not only was that the year Toei scored another box office bomb, The Great Animal Treasure Island, which caused them to cease producing original animated movies full stop, not only was it the year Hiroshi Okawa would die of unknown causes that August, but it was also the year most of the Horus animators would partake in a mass exodus from the company. Takahata, Miyazaki, and Ostuka included. All three men leaving for greener pastures, thus signaling an end for anime's first epoch. Looking back, both Takahata and Miyazaki don't seem to have fond memories of Horus. For good reason. The arduous production was incredibly mentally taxing, and it bombing at the box office didn't help matters. The reason why there's actually very little humor in Horus is because trying to be funny was the last thing on their minds. While Takahata does regard Horus as an alright first step, he could only see it as an imperfect film from his early days as an artist. Miyazaki, naturally, was less kind to his time on Horus. I can't talk about Horus, really. It's a disgusting story, but it's youth itself. It contains all the embarrassment. I did this with Pakusan, and we were both very young. He said that he is too embarrassed to say anything now. I was trying to draw a human being. I was burning with ambition. Even Toei as a company seemed embarrassed by Horus's existence for many years after its release. According to American producer Fred Ladd, who called the movie his personal favorite, when he tried to license it for a TV movie in the 70s, Toei's licensors seemed to regard Horus with a gloomy tone. Despite such pessimism from its creators though, I believe that they and everyone else owes a lot to Horus's existence. Horus was revolutionary for animation. It prompted more animators and directors like Takahata to break free from the Disney mold established by past Toei movies and forge their own path. When you see how scenes are animated, lush backdrops are painted, and simplified character designs are utilized, you can chart a path that originates from Horus that eventually goes from Lupin to World Masterpiece Theater to eventually Studio Ghibli. Horus was revolutionary in how people wrote characters. With anime, characters no longer had to fit into archetypes established by Western animation. They could grapple with their own morality, get righteously angry at the hero, and even find redemption through one good deed. Horus was revolutionary from a production standpoint, nurturing budding talent and proving that creating a film involves multiple visions instead of one singular one. Horus was even revolutionary in how it planted the roots for the first anime subculture. Thanks to Toei immediately fast-tracking it to summer matinees and have it be part of double features with popular properties like Ultraman, Horus quickly became a cult classic among young people. And thanks to the larger left-wing student movement, many college-aged people caught the overall Marxist message Takahata and Miyazaki delivered in their film. This caused a lot of student groups to grab 16mm copies of the film and organize showings at Marxist meetings, probably the first instance of organized fan groups for anime. The first otaku were communists. The more you know. You look back at what came before Horus, and while they certainly might not be bad, they still feel like Japanese stories trying to fit the mold established by Western cartoonists. Certainly not helped by most of the artists taking direct lessons from said cartoonists. But Takahata, a director who did not draw, drew inspiration outside that realm, and in doing so, helped craft groundbreaking tenets that future creators would draw from and create an art form that was not just for children and families. It was the art form that we know as anime. The production was taxing, and the outcome did not fully bloom until years later, but Horus is a fine work of art that a group of animators and directors worked together to bring into this world. But the story does not end there. You see, Horus's influence stretches far and wide over the history of anime, and more than 15 years later after its release, one of its creators would create a film that would also change the face of animation forever. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video or want to support this channel, please donate to my Patreon. Each dollar can give you early access to my videos as they come out, as well as keep the channel running a bit more smoothly. You can also subscribe to the channel, ring that bell for notifications, or just like this video. Either way, you'll be helping me out. That's all for now. See you for the next round of tapes.
Damn it!